Welcome back to the table, everybody. Today, David and I are doing a review of Catherine, the Cities of the Tsarina.
Yes, Catherine. We've had a chance to play this quite a few times.
Yes.
Probably more than you because I don't think it's quite out yet.
Yeah, almost definitely more than you have at this point.
But we've decided to do a review because we played it several times, and spoiler alert, we like it pretty well. It is a unique game, and it fills a very unique space, and we'll get to that towards the end of the review. But we do want to give you a bit of an overview of the game. But this is a game that has a very Euro look to it.
You look at it and you say, oh, this is a Euro.
Yes.
And it is.
For sure. And we mean that in the nicest sense. It's a nice, colorful Euro, but it also has some beiges going on.
Very beige tones.
And it's this board here that has a bunch of cities in Russia. So, you know, you've got a region, you've got cities. We're going to want to be putting presence in those cities. There is no area control here, but we are wanting presence in these cities to collect resources. There's, of course, in any good Euro, an abstract track to go up. Now, this track is kind of cool because it does a few different things. We'll get to that, but it has varying degrees of impact on the game in different ways. And then it's the cards. There's cards and cards and more cards. These are the project cards. These are the ones we're going to be playing throughout the game. This has some interesting ways of playing because you're going to have an action row, which is your top row, and then your activation row, which is the bottom row. Now, when the cards are in the top row, all of the information on them is pertinent.
Relevant.
Yes. The bottom row, when you play a card there, and it's the same cards you're playing to both rows, that basically becomes a blank card of the color that it is.
All that matters now is the color.
Yeah, because you're trying to activate the cards above it, which is kind of cool. So that introduces the concept of multi-use cards, which is something everyone here loves. But we're going to go over the structure of the game. The other things you see here, we each have an order card, which is
a little order fulfillment at the end.
Randomly dealt to us. That's going to be some end-of-game scoring, potentially. Hopefully, we've collected some resources. And then we've got our residences here that are going to go out onto the board in a number of different ways, but usually it's all driven by the cards and some interim things that you do between the rounds. Speaking of the rounds, we play 3 rounds, or decades in this case. And in between each decade, there's going to be this little segment where we check military, or cannons as they call it. We check the books that we've collected, and that is what they call it.
Check your residence and see if there's going to give you any points.
Yeah, so we're going to get some points. Some things are going to change in the board state, and then we're going to reset and play again and again. And we do that 3 times. Now, before we get to any of that, I do want to point out to you what these project cards look like. Like I said, the bottom row, it doesn't really matter, but when you play them into your action row, there's going to be a few different things here. Across the top can be a number of things, but on this one, you're going to see 3 of the different resources that we can collect out here. This is going to have an impact during the game because some of the actions you're taking are going to trigger off of how many of those and which different colors you have at the moment you're activating one of the cards. At the end of the game, though, whatever cards you have in your display, plus the resource tokens you have, are going to count towards fulfilling this order. Now, some of the other cards you might have are going to have cannons and books on them. These will also trigger some of the actions that you take on the cards, but more importantly, probably, during the interim section, we're going to be comparing cannons and getting some points for whoever has the most. And then books is going to allow us to put some residences out on the board.
The cool thing about cannons, too, is when you're looking at who has the most, it's kind of like 7 Wonders. So it's who has the most with your neighbors as well. So I might have more than David, so I get points because I have more than David. But I might have less than Ryan, who's on my right. And so I don't get the points that I would have gotten from Ryan as my neighbor.
Yeah, what's great about those situations, if you have more than both of them, and then you get 8 points in this case. And then we're not going to go over all the cards, but the other kind of card you're going to see across the top, you'll see 3 different cities listed. Now, when you play one of these cards, this is going to let you put some presence in one of those cities if you activate this card. And then across the bottoms of all these cards, and we definitely won't go into all this, are a ton of different actions.
For activation.
And those actions, like I said, trigger off the resources you might have, the books, the cannons, all sorts of different things, but that's really the engine that makes this game drive. So what do you do on your turn? Let's start. You're going to feed your action row with 3 cards at the beginning of the game after having been dealt 6. Then you're going to be left with 3 cards in your hand. So when you do that, you're going to want to consider like, I have some green cards in my hand so that I can activate this green card, or blue or yellow. You're going to want to manage that very carefully because you can get into situations where you're not drawing the right cards to activate the ones that you have. But you can generally manage
around it, right? There's only 3 colors in the game, right?
Yes.
So you have a good likelihood you'll get the color you need if you diversify a bit. If everything you put in your action row is blue, then you're really banking on getting some blues into your hand. Otherwise, you might be in a non-ideal situation.
Yeah, so at the beginning of each turn in every round, you're going to draw 2 cards, and you're going to do this during the round up to 4 times so that you end up ultimately having 7 cards in your action row. But after you draw the 2 cards, and you can do these first few parts simultaneously, everyone's going to take 2 of their cards and play 1 face down in the next open space of their action row, and then take another one of their cards and place it face down under any one of those cards, including the one that you just played. It doesn't have to be that one, but it can. And then everyone's going to reveal those cards. So if I placed here and here, I've added this green card to my action row, which I could potentially activate on a future turn.
Sure.
But I've played this yellow card beneath this card to activate and take the action of this card above it. And for instance, this one says, for every book that I have, I can draw a card. This brings me to probably my favorite thing about this game.
This is the meat.
Drawing cards, right? You've heard it in plenty of games, but in this game, it has a lot more meaning because you have a hand limit size. And during the course of a round, except for those first 2 cards, whenever you have to draw cards and it would exceed your hand limit, guess what? They're points instead.
They're completely just points. You don't even get to pick up the card and decide, okay, which 3 do I want to keep? You don't look at cards at all. You just strictly take them in points.
Yeah, so right now, if my hand limit size is 3, which it is at the beginning of the game, and I did an action that let me draw, say, 5 cards, I'm not taking any of them. I'm just getting 5 points. And that is a big thing that you can do throughout this game. You can actually strategize and play this game such that you're trying to flood your hand with cards, keeping your hand size down. Now, there's some potential drawback to that. But you could flood your hand with cards and just score points and score points. Now, you have to get those kinds of cards that are going to allow you to do that and allow you to draw more cards. And you might not. But you can do that quite a bit in this game. And it's a very interesting thing that when you read it in the rules, you're like, But I'll tell you, when you play it, you're like, oh.
It feels very satisfying.
It's very satisfying, and it's a really unique and interesting aspect to this game.
And it really creates a cool tension on the track that you saw, because there are 3 things on the track going on. The first one is how much you have in your hand size, right? So you start with 3 as your hand size, but it can go all the way up to 7. So if you have a hand limit of 7, you're probably not flooding your hand very much, because you would need a lot of card draw to get there. The second one, though, is going to be what interim scoring you're going to get. So each round you could get an additional point, 2 points, even up to 5 points each round just for that additional interim scoring. And the last one has to do with the points you'll get at the end of the game, depending on how many residents you have in a single network as your territory. So there's these 3 things that are interconnected. So you might be saying like, oh, I definitely want to go for the, flooding my hand kind of strategy. But that means you have to stay low on this track, and you might be hurting yourself later in those other 2 ways where you could be getting points.
Yeah, and the game is not really long. It's a pretty fast-playing game. Fast. So getting up this track is not something you're not going to say, I'm not going to go up the track for a long time, and then I'll just go up really far.
Right.
You kind of have to do that a little bit if that's what you're going to want to do. Now, we haven't played it enough to tell you whether or not you can completely win by just flooding your hand, although I will tell you I played 1 game with my sons, and my youngest son did indeed win this game by a decent margin by just flooding his hand.
Wow.
And he kept his hand size down. He did take this up a little bit, but it was his first game, and he just thought I should be doing that.
Yeah.
But after the fact, had he kept it low, he would have beat us even better. So it's a really interesting thing.
And the nice part, too, about the cards is you not only get to do the action on them, but a lot of those bonus actions that they have on the bottom are going to be, depending on which icons you have across the top, will probably move you up that track.
Yes.
So whenever you see these crowns, like if you had 3 books here in his tableau, which he doesn't at this time, but maybe he'll add another book later, that would give him 2 crowns up on the influence track.
Yeah, they're very situational. If you look at the bottom of the card, the top part is going to be something you can generally do as much as you can.
Yeah.
So for every set of this or that, you can take the result. the bottom you can only do once. And some of these can really get you some significant points.
Oh, definitely.
I've had some top actions where, like this one says, for every book I draw a card. I've had others where for every book or every book I got 2 points.
Yes.
Which, right there. Which is significant because if you happen to play one round where you're like, you know what, I'm going to do that and grab 10, or more points potentially, that's a not insignificant amount of points in this game.
And so then you're starting to think about, too, not just which cards I'm playing to activate them later, but what things are on the top of them. Like, I want to play more books so that when I do this book action, I'm really get the most out of it. The multi-use definitely comes into play. You're thinking about what you're playing now, if you're going to activate it, and what you don't activate at the end of the round is going to stay for the next age. So there's a little bit of strategy there, too, on like maybe I have this double military, this double cannon card, and I don't want to activate it this round. I just want to keep it around for another age and just keep my cannon count really high to try to score that interim scoring with them as well.
Yeah, and we'll get to that interim scoring right now because you're going to be doing what we just described, like I said, until there's 7 cards here. So you're going to have 4 more cards in addition to the 3, plus four cards on the bottom that have activated some cards. Once everyone's done that and you've gotten through the decade, you're going to go to an interim phase where you do these things in order. The first thing you're going to do is look at those cannons. Now, like we said earlier, you're just going to look at your neighbors and score some points. You're going to score 4 points for each neighbor that you have more cannons than. Now, like Emily said, you might do a long-term strategy like that. And it's definitely going to be something, too, where you're not only just looking at your cannons, but you're constantly during a round going to be looking at your neighbors and going, okay, she's got cannons. Like, I'm giving up on cannons. I'm not doing that. But if you're playing in a multiplayer game, then you might look over here and go, oh, I could get 4 points over here.
I just put one more cannon out.
So there's a lot of decisions going on there. But you're going to look at the cannons first, take your points. Then you're going to look at the books. Now, this is sort of more of an all or nothing. The person who has the most books in their display is going to place a residence in any city they want out here.
Anyone.
And whenever you place a residence in a city, say here, right there, I would simply take the corresponding resource and add it to my display. This resource is going to do a couple things. It's going to help me fulfill that order, but those cards that I play in future rounds that key off specific resources that I have at the moment, it's going to help that engine.
You now own that forever.
Yeah, it's going to give me some more things. So that player is going to get that.
And also, these are not limited. So he can go there right now, and next round I might also go to Novigrad, and I can also take this resource. There's enough for each of us to take one.
Exactly. And you can only have one residence in each space. And the other reason you're putting these out here is because you, like you said, wanting to try to build a network that's all connected, because that's some end of game scoring as well. Now, the person who has the least is going to get nothing. And then everyone in between is going to get a joker tile.
Yes.
The joker tiles aren't necessarily, or they're not in a 2-player game, but if you're playing with 3 and 4, those players in the middle are going to get a joker tile. This is a wild resource. Now, this is not a wild resource that counts during the game, but only for the end of the game when you're fulfilling that order. And that's the books. The next thing you're going to go to are those residences. You're going to score points for every residence you have out there. Plus, if you happen to have built residences in these spots, you're going to get an extra point.
Nice. And the next thing is you're also going to get those extra bonus points for how far you are on the track. So again, it could be anything from none all the way to 5 points per round that you're getting just for how high up you've been on influence.
Yeah, those, I mean, points are points. I'll take every point I can get.
Point.
I would say those are probably the least significant points. That's the thing that motivates me the least on this track anywhere, those points. Because to get up into the 5 range, that's going to be at the end of the game.
You really have to be trying for it.
And for the first part, it's 0 to 1 probably in the first round or so. And then you're going to basically clean things up.
So anything where you've activated a card, you're going to move that action card and activation row and take them away. And you're going to be left with 3 cards remaining to start you off for your next decade. So in each decade, you have some stuff to basically start you in the new round. And you control, again, which ones those will be based on if you chose to activate them or not.
Yeah, and then the last thing you do, at least in the first and the second decade, is going to draw 2 cards. Now, this isn't like drawing 2 cards at the beginning of the round, but when you draw these 2 cards, again, if you exceed your hand limit, you're just going to take 2 points instead, or maybe 1 if you could take 1 card and then not the other. And then you just start again. You do another decade, you do a 3rd decade, and in the end, you're just going to basically take a look at the order card as well as all the points you've scored throughout the game, and the person who has the most points, of course, wins the game.
Right.
So, Emily, well, first of all, we kind of spoiled it. We said that we liked the game, but what did you like most about the game?
Definitely the part that I like most about the game is the card limit that you have and the fact that you can kind of start flooding your hand. I thought when you told me the rules, I was like, ooh, this seems interesting. I wonder what it's going to be like in play. And when we started playing it, I was like, oh, I can work this out so that I'm drawing 7 cards, but I'm not actually drawing any cards. I'm just getting them all in straight points. That's super cool. But I felt like later on in the game, there's this tension where you're like, I kind of want a higher card limit, a hand limit, just so that way I have more options of what I can do. So it's a good tension, right? Where you're like, I like this strategy, it seems really cool, but also I wish I had options on what I could do for the different things I'm doing with my cards. So you have both a positive and a negative of teaching you different ways you could be playing the game.
Yeah, one thing we didn't really cover is these cards are not just sitting in your hand and just being played here. A lot of the actions that you have too are going to allow you to discard some cards out of your hand for big points. There's one type of card in particular that lets you discard 3 cards for 10 points. And if they're 3 of the same color, you get to go up the favor track as well. That's a very appealing grab.
It's a juicy card, but you really have to set up for it then. So like if your hand limit is 3, it's going to be pretty difficult to get 3 of the same color just on happenstance.
I mean, it can happen, but the result too is if you use that card and you get rid of 3 cards in your hand, you might find yourself into a situation that when you're drawing 2 cards at the beginning of a turn, those are the only 2 cards you have.
You're top decking. There's nothing you can do.
You are top decking those 2 cards. And when you get 2 cards and have a display of just yellow,
oh my gosh, you're in a bad situation.
You better hope you draw yellow because you're not going to be able to activate those cards. So these are all things that you can manage around, but it's definitely something that I would probably warn someone about when you're teaching this game is like, hey, look, this is hand management to the nth degree. Like you really need to be careful because you're not only scoring points and counting up books and cannons, but the cards themselves are kind of a currency at times for some of the actions.
Yeah, and I would say that can lead to a little bit of thinking time in plays. Like really, you're playing simultaneously. A lot of the actions, there's really no take that or really player interaction other than the interim scoring. So it's not like, we're really waiting for long turns. David and I can basically be doing stuff at the same time, unless David's deciding to really decide which of my cards is the best effect for me. And I'm like, all right, David, are we going to finish the age?
And there's a good and a bad to that. I mean, no one likes drastic AP, and I wouldn't say this has severe AP.
No.
But because it's multi-use cards, and particularly as the game progresses, maybe less in the first round, a little more in the second, but
that last stage.
That last round, you are really wanting to figure out, okay, how can I best play? I could play this for this action, and it has a cannon, which is going to get me in contention.
Right.
There's just a lot of little icons to consider on these cards to think what you want to do, let alone the whole concept of that color management with the blue and the yellow and the green and the hand management on top of it. So you really have to take a lot into consideration. You've got a lot of plate spinning, and you're trying to figure out, okay, how can I do this so that I don't screw up?
Right.
Because you kind of can. Like I said, if you get too much of one color in your display, and it is easy to overlook that because you can have a multicolored display in 1 minute. But then if you've activated a lot of the blues and yellows, and then everything washes and you're like, oh, I just have 3 greens now.
And now all I have is green.
It's just something, and I actually like that. You know, I like games that allow you to kind of like learn from a situation like that and go, okay, this is interesting. I got to think a little bit harder for this one. And the coolest thing about this game is that it gives you a lot of that in a very short, quick game and simple to play. This is, I mean, we can set this up. We can take it down very quickly.
Teaches really easy.
It teaches very easily, and it's incredibly satisfying for, I think, gamers of all levels.
Yeah.
But it is incredibly thinky for such a fast game, which puts it in a unique space, I think.
Definitely. I would say that there are games I like more than this, but I would keep this one in my collection just because I don't know anything else where I could say like, hey, somebody's going to be coming to the board game night, but they're like
a little late.
They're running an hour and a half behind. I'd be like, oh, well, we could play Catherine in that time.
Yeah.
Like, let's just play that real quick before they get here. I don't have other games that I could play so quickly and yet still scratch the same itch of, like, I'm making important decisions. I'm getting to do cool different things, like in another longer Euro.
Yeah, I could actually see. So I don't think Catherine long-term, if you have a group of Euro players that gets together, I don't think Catherine's long-term that game, you're going to say, hey, what are we playing this Friday night?
Yeah.
Let's play Catherine. I mean, you might play Catherine, but it's not the main event, probably, because it's such a shorter game. Now, what I could see happening is like, hey, let's start with Catherine.
Yeah,
and especially if it's new players, you might start with Catherine, and then you might find everyone going, let's just play it again.
Sure.
Let's try it again, because if it's new players, they might go, okay, I want another stab at this. So it could potentially become an event being played a couple times, because in 2 players, what did we play? I mean, we could probably play this in 20
I would say we could probably play it in 20 minutes. You and I, now that we've played it a couple times.
Yeah, once you have some experience under your belt, you can get this thing done pretty quickly. But I think first time with 4 players...
You're talking more like an hour.
Probably an hour.
Yeah.
But I don't think much
more
than that.
Not much more than that, no. Unless you're really deciding, like, it depends on how much you want to put thinking time into it. So.
Unless you've got some severe APers at your table, I think you can get it done in under an hour. It's very interesting, this track. Like we said, you could go up this track and score some big points. So the way that the score is going to happen out here on the map is you're going to take your biggest network, and that's connected places where you have residences, and you're going to multiply that by this third number in this column. So you can see that number is 0 up into here. And then it's just high. 1 and 2 for quite some time. So let's say your network's 5 residences, which in our plays has been a reasonable amount of residences. Now that we haven't tried hard on the residences for that, so I'm guessing you could get bigger. But 5 times 1 is 5, 5 times 2 is 10. And we already told you there's a card to get 10 points.
Right.
So if you want to go that route, you could go pretty high. I think the most I've gotten from the residences was 21 points.
Yeah, I was going to say, didn't you get in the 20s ones?
I got up to 3, and I had 7, I think, residences. Yeah. So I got into the 20s. So it's doable, but our games have been, in the 80s, maybe?
80s, 90s, yeah.
So you can get up there. So you just got to determine whether or not that's worth it. I really find the points that you scored during the game
the most satisfying.
Easily the most satisfying.
They feel fun. You're like, ooh, look at what I'm doing, David. I just got 10 points from this. And I'm like, wow, how'd you do that?
Yeah, and then just to put that into perspective, the order card, too, is either going to be 5, 8, or 12. Or, I suppose, 0 points, depending on how many of these, 7 resources you collect. And everyone's going to need 3, and then 2 of another, and then 1 of each of the other 2. And sometimes in some of our games, we've pretty much ignored this.
I completely ignored it in our last game.
If you want to flood your hand, you're not going to be going out here this much. Right. Therefore, you're not going to get a lot of these tokens. But keep in mind, you could manage that last round pretty effectively to nearly get 5 or 8 of these points, potentially, just from the cards that you've laid out.
Yeah, it's like any good Euro. You're not going to be able to do everything, but you can do some things really well, just depending on what you want to do in the game. Yeah,
so that is Catherine. It is a fast-playing Euro through and through that probably won't be the main event of your night, but it might be if you play it a couple times. Yeah. It's certainly going to be the kind of Euro that you might get to the table from time to time if you have a group of Euro players that come over every once in a while. If you have any questions at all about it, please make them in the comments below. We've played it enough to certainly be able to answer, I think, just about anything you can throw at us. But until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then. Congratulations, you got to the end of one of our videos. Now, if you want more practice, just click on the video over here. It's another video. You might not have seen it yet, so click on it. If you don't want to do that, at least click on the subscription button below. That always helps us. And if you want notifications, please ring that bell.